Well, I'm Ed Ellis, and I'm a professor at the University of Alabama. And in this series of videos, we're going to be looking at applications of Make Sense for grade 6-8 science content standards. And in part one, we'll be looking at using the Smart Sheets to teach high-frequency science topics. And later in part two, in the follow-up video, we'll be looking at specific vocabulary Smart Sheets for teaching science vocabulary. So to get started with part one, in terms of the types of knowledge you tend to emphasize in science, there tends to be a number of specific types. And so any given science lesson is highly likely going to be mostly about one of these topics. Same thing with just about any science standard. And so for an example, if you look at a concept that you're teaching, typically a concept is composed of distinctive features, properties, or functions, or that sort of thing. And an example of one of those content standards might be this. And so, for an example, El Nino, the Gulf Stream, the jet stream, etc., are specific concepts that might be taught. Likewise, processes tend to be emphasized a lot in science. So, for an example, how growth and development occurs, the reproductive process, and so forth. Classification systems are emphasized quite a bit, as you know. Likewise, occasionally you teach about famous people, such as famous scientists. Events and phenomena are pretty huge in science, of course. So the whole process of how mitochondria releases energy is a process or an event or phenomena. There's a lot of information about structures in sciences. For an example, the internal and external structures of plants. Systems and components, such as reproductive systems, circulatory systems, and so forth. Life forms and characteristics of living things, including growth and development, reproductive, etc. There's a lot of procedures in science, such as identifying the steps within the scientific process or applying process skills. So when you look at a concept and you basically dissect it to look at what does students really need to know about a concept, there's the gist or the main idea of the concept, and also the distinctive or critical features. This is basically main idea and details, if you will. They also need to know what are examples of the concept and non-examples, so what it is and what it's not. Likewise, they need to know relationships to other concepts and factors that affect it, as well as things the concept affects. They also need to make comparisons to other concepts, as well as the concept is reflected sometimes in a specific component or steps in a process. So for an example, when you're teaching a concept and you're focusing on the main idea and critical features, that's essentially the definition of the concept. When you're looking at examples and non-examples, those are manifestations and applications of it. The rest of it tends to be different forms of relational understanding of how that concept relates to others in various ways. So if you take this same dichotomy of information, basically this first section of the main ideas, features, examples, and non-examples, all of that is pretty much can be depicted in hierarchical information structures, such as a web. Relationships to other concepts in terms of factors that affect it and what it affects is basically obviously cause and effect. Comparison is going to be compare and contrast, and likewise concept is reflected in specific components or steps is going to be either a linear sequence or some kind of cycle. So what we're going to do is give you a couple of examples of what I mean. So let's say the main idea and critical features as reflected by definition. Here's an example of one of the content standards. And so basically these are asking for the student to understand the main idea and features of what the El Nino is or what the Gulf Stream is. Now if you look at the home page of the Make Sense Strategy software, there's just a ton of resources for teaching hierarchic kinds of information. And so what I'm going to do next is just give you several examples of how different teachers have used the hierarchic smart sheets to address various science concepts. So for an example, this is a simple web, 6 details web for the jet stream. Here's an example of albedo and various 4 or 6 rather key aspects of that. Now what I'm going to be doing actually with these samples is sort of going through them fast or somewhat quickly, so You're not going to be able to read a lot of the details or things that students or teachers have actually listed. But if you're interested, you can always pause the video and take a look at it. And you can also take a look at the handout and sort of study it at your own leisure. And also, all of the examples that I'm providing here in this video are also found on the software itself, and I'll show you where to find those a little bit later. So anyway, we're dealing with hierarchical information, which is basically main ideas and distinctive features. And we're looking at various ways teachers have used these to teach science concepts. And this is a two main idea frame, and this is an example of how a teacher used a two main idea frame to teach classification systems. So it's basically, this is the main ideas, and then this is the major topic, and then the main ideas, and then essential details underneath each one. It's a flow chart used to teach its hierarchical information about structures. Here's a different graphic. It's a four main idea box frame for addressing the structure of the rainforest. Likewise, here's one for structures that depicting critical features of the layers in the atmosphere. Here's one for systems and components. Three main idea frame used to depict life forms. Now, this is a very simple one, like basic information about the shell, food, and characteristics of turtles. Here's a four main idea frame for something a little bit more sophisticated, like the vampire bat. And then here's an eight main idea form getting into another kind of life form, in this case, infectious diseases. And what are they, their critical features? In terms of teaching processes, this is a three main idea cloud frame, which is the three R's for conserving resources. And here's one depicting the metamorphosis of insects, which is, of course, another process. So these are all various different applications of hierarchic smart sheets. What I'm going to do now is sort of take a time out from this presentation and actually open up the actual software and illustrate how you can access these. So I'm going to pause that, and then this is the home page of the software. And so what we've been looking at are various hierarchic type of smart visuals. So for an example, if I click on three main ideas, if I've got a concept that has three main ideas, and I want to use like this three main idea frame, I'm going to click on color, and a color version of that will open up. And remember, these are interactive, which means you can type on them and then save to folder and that sort of thing. Likewise, if you want a black line master, you click on that, and that way you're not using a lot of color ink if you're printing these as handouts for students. I use the color ones when you're doing things like whiteboard or smartboard. Of course, the black and white ones are more for handouts for students and that sort of thing. The other thing is I mentioned that all of the examples that I'm going to be sharing with you are also on here. So for an example, let me just find that 3 R's of conserving resources under the three main idea clouds. Anytime you look at these topics underneath, there's that sample we were just seeing in the presentation. And remember, anytime you're looking at a sample, be sure to click on menu to get back. So if you're teaching a science concept, one of the first things to ask yourself is, how many main ideas am I really going to be addressing? And so if, for an example, it's 4 main ideas, you'd click on 4, and that opens up a variety of different smart sheets that address 4 main ideas, for an example, that then you can use and put for your own lesson. Likewise, if you need 8 main ideas and so forth. So these are all different kinds of hierarchical graphics. Sometimes you'll see a little number like